All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Anderson Warshaw, and I will be presenting on my Keystone entitled Symphonies in Swing, where I composed jazz inspired by classical music. I want to give a really quick thank you to my advisor, Professor Richard Cornell, who was also my composition professor in the School of Music. So a few quick facts about me starting off this presentation. So number one, I was in the BU School of Music. Number two, I am no longer in the BU School of Music as a music major. And if you are one of my friends, you might assume that I'm still in the School of Music based off of how much I play music, practice, talk about music, just spend my life engrossed in it, which kind of raises the question, why did I leave? Essentially, the BU School of Music is a classical school of music. You can see this is an advertisement for the BU Symphony Orchestra playing at Boston Symphony Hall, which is actually happening right now as I'm giving this presentation. So if I were still in the CFA, I'd probably be over there right now. But basically, I am a jazz musician. I love jazz. Also classical music, yes, but I wanted to be able to explore other genres of music. I was unsatisfied with the sort of focus of a very classical conservatory environment. So this project aimed to reconcile the separation between these two genres in music in general, but from my experience of it in sort of music academia. So I mentioned before, composing jazz with classical harmonies. I broke that down here into three different sections. The harmonic analysis, where I took a selection of classical pieces and analyzed the harmonic content, basically, what notes are being played, in what order, sort of looking at what that really looks like. And then I took that analysis and did what is called a harmonic reduction, where I essentially abstracted that analysis, taking it out of the score that I initially analyzed and coming up with a list, which I'm going to go over all this in more detail, of the harmonic content, and then composition, where I took that harmonic analysis and gave it melody and chords and rhythm and texture and all these musical things. And then after that, I rehearsed the piece and performed it in a recital, which I gave last week, which I will not be talking much about since it deserves its own presentation and the composition is its own whole thing. So step one, my harmonic analysis. Last summer, I put together a collection of classical pieces that I wanted to analyze the harmonic content of. I listened through a bunch, and these are the ones I decided on. Trisense, which is a modern trombone quartet. Brass Quintet Number 4 by Victor Ewald, which is a Romantic era brass quintet. Maurice Ravel's Piano Concerto in G major, specifically the second movement. Maurice Ravel, actually a notable classical composer who was inspired by a lot of jazz music in his time in the early 20th century. And Frédéric Chopin's Prelude in E minor, Number 4. Chopin, a famous classical composer who is known for inspiring a lot of jazz musicians today. So what does harmonic analysis really look like? This is the beginning of Chopin's Prelude Number 4 that is now playing. You don't need to know, be able to read the sheet music, the analysis, just to give a little bit of a feel of the piece. It's very famous, you may know it. But basically, there are two separate ways of analyzing this very rich harmonic content. And that was the end of this short piece right here. At the bottom, and this is what I learned in classical music school, where basically each chord, every musical moment is related back to the key of the piece, being, in this case, the first chord that is played, whereas a jazz analysis analyzes the sort of chords and notes in isolation outside of the information that comes before and after. So I analyzed these classical pieces using primarily a jazz analysis. Then the harmonic reduction. This is an example. This is the Chopin Prelude. You can see the boxes kind of correlate between the score and my little reduction. You can see there, it is just an abstract list of chords. It's not music. It is basically just a series of my little code, which then gets exploded out into real music during the process of composition, where I give this code and these chords, harmonic kind of meaning through melody and texture and all those musical things that I mentioned earlier. So that's just a quick screen grab of my score for my piece, and you can see that those are like the little bit of the Chopin etude, how it looks in my music. And I'm going to talk about that more later. Now that I've gone through that process, here is a quick example from start to finish of my composition process. So this is Ravel's Second Piano Concerto in G, a little moment that I really, really loved, that I'm now going to play for you guys. The moment where the flute hits its highest note was really that little moment that I latched onto when I was first listening to this. So I really loved the little tension and release there, and overall it's a beautiful piece, beautiful passage, and I decided, hey, I want to include this in my piece. So you can see the little harmonic analysis that I did under that, and here is a little example again of what that looks like in its first form in Ravel's original score and in my score. You can see the difference in instrumentation here. You probably can't read it, but the Ravel piece, it's written for a whole orchestra, but the instruments that are playing in this particular example are flute, clarinet, piano, and a string section, violin, viola, cello, bass, very classical, orchestral instrumentation. My piece, from top to bottom, is alto sax, tenor sax, and bari sax, 3 instruments not usually found in an orchestra. They're very associated with jazz. And then trumpet, trombone, piano, bass, and drum kit, which finishes the octet of 8 instruments that I wrote for, and is a very traditionally jazz instrumentation. And so that moment turned into a little bit in my piece, which I'm now going to play a brief moment from here. The audio is not the professional audio that I got recorded, so it's just from the camera, but the top note in the trumpet lines up to the peak in the flute. Right, so the final product was my piece entitled Meditations on a Morning. I already mentioned the instrumentation for jazz octet. It was about 14 minutes long in 4 movements, one associated with each of the pieces I took inspiration from. And the score was about 28 pages long. And the recital that I performed last week I'm going to be posting a video recording of it in the coming weeks when I'm able to get everything together. But basically, it involved 12 musicians total, including me from the BU School of Music, not in the School of Music, from Berkeley even, and looked at a range of various classical and jazz pieces, sort of a kaleidoscope of a lot of the music that I've studied and performed here at BU. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much.
All right, we'll be opening it to questions.
Hi. Great job. I hope that we will get a chance to link out to your final recording, because I'd love to watch it. So in your project, you focused on turning classical music into jazz music, which I love. In this process, do you of breaking it down in the way that you did with the score, did you find things that you think would be helpful in the reverse? Because I have been to the BSO where they have played jazz music, and it was a bunch of classical musicians playing jazz music. Right. So I'm just wondering if in this study there were things you found where, this could help also do the opposite, help classical musicians play jazz and not and maybe understand it a little more.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with the sort of phenomenon you're talking about, which is a classically trained musician playing jazz music, which frequently sounds sort of inauthentic to the real style. In this project, I focused very heavily on sort of the harmonic content and the actual harmonic structure of these pieces, and I think the problem that you're talking about is a lot more derived from the actual style that the music is being performed in. So it's not necessarily something that can be derived from the harmonies themselves and the ways the pieces are composed, although that absolutely plays a factor, but is much more in the performance practices of jazz music. Specifically, the concept of like swing that people talk about, and articulations and that sort of thing. It's also really hard to replicate these sorts of idiomatic things in jazz music in a large orchestra environment because frequently they are, articulations are much shorter. There's a lot more like, close rhythmic accuracy and such that is sort of hard to replicate in an orchestra. So I don't necessarily think there's that much to be found here that can reconcile that particular problem, but I really appreciate the question. I think that is really interesting, as a classically trained musician who plays jazz, but yeah, thank you.
This is so cool. I'm coming at this as a classically trained musician who has tried and failed to play jazz. I'm just curious why you chose these pieces in particular. Did you start from liking the chord progressions that there were and you built from there, or did you look for those chord progressions and come to these pieces?
Right. Definitely more of the first example that you said, where I really loved these pieces and listening to these pieces, and they kind of intrigued me as to wondering, what actually is that? So the brass quintet, the Victor Ewald, I'm not going to go back to that slide, but that piece I have performed before in a brass quintet and was one of my favorite pieces to perform. I mentioned as well in the presentation the Ravel piece. Ravel is a very well known for having traveled to America in the 1930s and really taking influence from jazz music. So that particular piece was recommended to me by my advisor, Professor Richard Cornell. The Chopin piece, again, I've studied Chopin in my music history classes and very well known as a jazz pianist's classical pianist. So I kind of knew that a lot of this music is sort of closely associated with jazz in a way that a lot of classical music or Baroque music might not be. So that was the inspiration for a lot of that, because I feel like few people really know the extent to which a lot of these genres and influences cross-pollinated each other, especially in the early 20th century, as jazz was kind of coming into its own.
Alrighty, we'll start getting ready for the next presentation.